exoplanet that is the most likely candidate for future human colonization for when the Earth eventually dies to the red giant sun. To an exoplanet that is being literally eaten alive by its own parent star and will eventually become a rocky core of its former self. From a planet that is made entirely of diamonds from the inside and out. To an exoplanet that is nearly as old as the Milky Way galaxy and the universe itself. And to an exoplanet of which was inspired for the game Subnautica and the planet that it takes place on, 4546b. In this sneak peek of the third season of Journey Through Space, I will be explaining the different categories of exoplanets that I will be briefly talking about in this video right now. This first category of exoplanets is what I'm calling New Earths. New Earths are Earth-like exoplanets that will be a replacement for Earth once the Earth we know of is no more. So in other words, when Earth goes bye-bye, we will have to find a new home, and that is where these New Earth exoplanets will come in. However, as it says here, I have come up with factors that the candidates I'll be talking about must have, which will be vital for our survival and the future of our species. This is the criteria that they must meet. Now going over them, number 1, comfortable temperatures. If a New Earth exoplanet is to be a home for us, it must have temperatures that'll be comfortable just enough for us to survive. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Because Earth will for now have the right temperatures for us to survive. And that is why the first of the criteria is comfortable temperatures. Number 2, perfect or somewhat perfect oxygen levels. In order for one of these candidates to be a perfect replacement for Earth, they must have the right or somewhat correct oxygen levels for us to breathe. Because, as I always say, no oxygen, no life. So, if we are to live on these candidates, they must provide us with the perfect or somewhat perfect amount of oxygen for us to breathe, because otherwise we won't survive. Number 3, resources for us to grow food, materials for construction of buildings, and fuel for power. If any of these candidates are gonna be a perfect new home for us, they must provide us with the ideal materials that we will need to start growing food, construct shelters, and power all of our buildings. Number 4, fresh water for us to drink, clean ourselves, dishwashing, washing our clothes, etc. Again, like with all the other factors, fresh water is the most important thing in our survival. Because since the majority of the stuff that's inside our bodies is water, if one of these candidates is to be the proper ideal home for us, they must have plenty of fresh water that is not toxic or dirty to the point of where we will be at risk of being harmed. They must be clean, because otherwise we won't be able to sustain ourselves. Number 5. Low levels of radiation. Currently, the biggest problem with us looking for a new planet Earth candidate is how much radiation it has. If an Earth-like exoplanet contains radiation at high levels or somewhat uncomfortable levels, they will not do us any good at all. But if they have low levels of radiation, to the point of where it won't really do anything to us, we might be able to use it for power. And no, not nuclear power. Not after what happened at Chernobyl back in 1986. And maybe, just maybe, if one of these candidates will have somewhat low levels of radiation, perhaps we might be able to use it for power. You never know. Lastly, number 6. Comfortable gravity levels. If one of these new Earth candidates to be a new home for us, the gravity on them must be somewhat similar to Earth or somewhere around the same gravity level as Earth, so that we will be more comfortable, and especially during pregnancy. Because if babies that are born on one of these Earth-like exoplanets are born and they don't recognize gravity, they won't have any chance of surviving and carrying on the next generation. As I'm saying here, if one or more of these candidates have most of these requirements, then they'll be put on the list of candidates to be our new home. However, if one or more of them do not meet these requirements, well, sorry about your luck, but you're off the list. So, if they are to be our new home, they must meet most or even all of these requirements in order for them to be our new home for the next generation. This next category of exoplanets is what I like to call the dying. They are exoplanets that are dying, either by being literally eaten alive by their own parent stars, or perhaps they will soon be merged with other planets that are in the same system as them. This will happen either by them being pushed or basically kicked out of their orbit and getting closer to other planets, or perhaps their star's gravity level pulling them in and causing them to collide with other planets, eventually merging them into one singular planet. How do we know this? Just speculation. This next category of exoplanets that I have come up with is what I like to call elders of the universe. These are exoplanets that are just as old as the universe, as well as the Milky Way galaxy itself. And as I said here, one such example is PSR B1620-26b, aka Methuselah, which is located 12,600 light years away from us in the constellation of Scorpius. Briefly talking about Methuselah, this exoplanet is 12.7 billion years old, 3 times the age of Earth, meaning that it must have formed around 2 billion years after the Big Bang, which created space, time, everything. And it also means that this exoplanet has a ton of stories that have yet to be unraveled to the human mind. As I briefly mentioned in here, Methuselah was the very first exoplanet that has been discovered. This old-timer was discovered back in 1992 and is currently sitting as the oldest exoplanet that we have ever discovered. However, there are others out there that may be older or even younger, but just as old as Methuselah. This next category is one of my personal favorites, the Galactic Wonders. These are exoplanets that are, well, let's just say different from the usual exoplanets that we are going to be talking about in this third season of Journey Through Space. As I mentioned here, a perfect example is the Super Earth 55 Cancri E, which is also known as the Diamond Planet, meaning that it is made entirely of diamonds from both the inside and the outside. And I mean, this entire planet is made of diamonds. And as far as we know, well, it's obvious. Although some of these galactic wonders of the universe are just too dangerous for us to do pretty much anything when it comes to going inside them. And 55 Cancri E here is among them. So until then, we can only speculate and with hypothesis of how these planets work and even what makes them tick. So for now, all we can do is guess and make hypothesis of what these galactic wonders of the universe are like. That is very limited to our knowledge of planets in the universe. This last category of exoplanets is what I like to call the ocean worlds. The ocean worlds are exoplanets that are completely covered in water. And as I mentioned here, Gliese 1214b is one perfect example of this category of exoplanets, which are incredibly interesting for us to observe. And 4546b in Subnautica was inspired for that as well. But however, like with any other exoplanet that has landmass and water, the biggest question about them is there any form of life living on these ocean worlds? Unfortunately, that is a question that we are unable to answer due to the lack of technology and due to our lack of understanding of how these exoplanets actually work. So these have been these categories of exoplanets, which I have just briefly talked to y'all about and have described. These are the categories which are going to be featured in the third season of Journey Through Space, which, depending on what I have going on in real life, it'll hopefully launch by either later this year or perhaps even the beginning of next year. I actually have no idea. But until then, take in everything that I have said in this video discussing these different categories of exoplanets that we are going to be exploring visiting and exploring in the 3rd season of Journey Through Space. And hopefully, I will see you all up there in space. Catch y'all later.